Weddings are supposed to begin with joy, with white roses filling the air with their fragrance, with laughter flowing through every corner of the hall, and with music carrying families toward celebration. But for Ethan Collins, the day his sister Emily married and was not wrapped in joy. It began with fire, with a burning sting across his cheek, with the sound of his mother's hand striking him so hard that the entire room froze. The music died mid-note. The laughter collapsed into silence. Even the clinking of champagne glasses seemed to vanish into the heavy air. Ethan stood there, his cheek blazing red, his body trembling from the force of humiliation, while every eye turned to him. He was a young man who had carried the weight of being different all his life. He was gay, and for that, he had never been accepted by his mother. To her, he was a wound she never wanted to acknowledge, a shadow at the edge of her carefully constructed family image. Yet now, in front of 100 guests, she had turned her private disdain into public shame. Her rage twisted her face, her fingers still trembling from the strike, as if she herself could not believe the audacity of her action. Across the aisle, Bahita, Emily the bride, radiant just moments earlier, screamed through her veil of tears in white silk, "You had no right to ruin this day." Her words cut deeper than the slap, piercing Ethan with something far sharper than pain. They were the words of a sister he loved, a sister who once held his secrets close, now spitting them out as if he were an intruder in her perfect world. And then there was Daniel, the groom, the man at the center of the ceremony. He did not move. He did not speak. His face, once charming and full of confidence, had gone pale and still. He froze like a statue carved from the coldest stone, watching as the moment unraveled, refusing to act, refusing to stand for either truth or love. The room, filled with relatives, friends, and strangers, rippled with whispers. Some gasped in horror, others exchanged knowing glances as if a scandal had finally stepped into the light. To Ethan, it felt as if the walls themselves were leaning closer, waiting for him to crumble under their judgment. But before he could speak, before he could even breathe against the crushing silence, a voice rang out. It came not from the bride nor from the groom, and not from the mother whose hatred had struck him, but from the back of the hall, a voice low, steady, and edged with years of unshakable authority. It was his grandfather. "Hear me," the old man's words thundered, silencing even the whispers. His presence, tall and unyielding despite the gray in his hair, commanded the room. His eyes locked on Ethan's mother, then on Emily, then finally on the frozen figure of Daniel. "Tell them the truth," he declared, each word rolling through the hall like a gavel against marble. "Or I will." The guests shifted in their seats, tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Emily's lips parted in shock. His mother's jaw tightened in fury. Daniel's eyes flickered with fear, and Ethan stood between them all, the sting of the slap still burning across his face, his heart pounding against his ribs as if it might break through his chest. He had not spoken a word, yet somehow he had already been placed at the center of a storm he never chose. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate love now teetered on the edge of ruin, not because of him, but because of secrets that refused to stay buried. In that instant, Ethan realized the truth about silence. Silence was not safety. It was a prison. And when silence breaks, it can shatter everything at once. If you believe love should stand taller than lies, stay with this story until the end. This is Heart Stories, where every truth comes to light, no matter how painful, no matter how unexpected. The silence that followed his grandfather's voice was heavy, suffocating, like the stillness before lightning strikes. Emily's bouquet slipped slightly in her trembling hands as she turned toward her brother. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth for him, burned with accusation. The white of her dress seemed almost blinding now, a cruel contrast to the venom in her words. Her lips trembled, but the rage was louder than the heartbreak. "It was you, wasn't it?" she hissed, her voice rising high enough to pierce through the hushed crowd. "You sent those photographs. The words clung to the air like smoke. Before Ethan could react, their mother's voice cut through, sharp and furious, louder than the echo of the earlier slap. Yes, it was him. Who else could it have been? Her tone carried both certainty and disgust, as if every ounce of contempt she had stored for her son had finally found its moment to be unleashed. Ethan froze. Photographs, he did not understand. But as the murmur spread across the hall, the whispers made it clear. Photographs of Daniel with another woman, proof of betrayal, proof that the carefully sculpted groom had cracks beneath his golden image. Ethan's chest tightened, his pulse roaring in his ears. His sister's glare stabbed him like knives. Emily, the girl who once defended him against classmates who mocked him for his rainbow pins, now stood ready to believe the worst. Her words came out raw, broken by cows but laced with fury. How could you do this to me, Ethan? To destroy my wedding, to shame me in front of everyone. Her pain bled into anger, and that anger had found its scapegoat. Ethan, Shawnee, all around. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement. Others stared at Ethan as though betrayal itself had sprouted from his skin. Even the smallest gasp from the back row sounded like judgment. He opened his mouth. The words caught in his throat before he forced them out. I didn't do it. His voice trembled, yet he held firm. I swear, I didn't. But his plea drowned in disbelief. His mother sneered, her lip curling as though his denial was nothing more than another insult to her dignity. You expect us to believe you after everything. Look at him, she spat, gesturing toward her son as if he were poison. Always jealous, always looking for attention. Of course it was him, yet the one who mattered most was silent. Daniel, the groom. His silence was worse than any accusation. He stood there, hands clasped too tightly in front of him, eyes cast downward. He did not deny the affair. He did not defend Ethan. He simply stood like a man cornered, unwilling to speak, unwilling to move, and that silence was louder than any words could ever be. For Ethan, it felt like betrayal twice over. The first from his mother, who had always carried hatred for who he was. The second from Daniel, whose refusal to speak left the weight of suspicion crashing entirely onto him. The hall turned into a courtroom without walls, where every glance was a verdict and every whisper a sentence. Ethan's heart pounded, not only with fear but with sorrow. He looked at Emily, her mascara streaking down her cheeks, her wedding day unraveling before her eyes. He wanted to tell her he loved her, that he would never harm her, that her happiness meant more to him than his own pride. But his words were dust in a storm. The cruelty of assumption had already taken its root. Once people decide where guilt belongs, truth rarely finds a way back. In that moment, Ethan learned that lies are not always spoken. Sometimes they are carved into silence. Sometimes they are written in the refusal to defend. Sometimes they grow in the absence of courage. And so he stood there, condemned without proof, his heart breaking not from the sting of accusation alone, but from the realization that family love, sibling love can fracture in an instant when trust is clouded by fear and shame. It is easy to believe what confirms our anger. It is harder to stop and search for truth, but the strength of love is proven not in the moments when everything feels certain, but when doubt whispers and we choose to see the heart we once believed in. The accusation still hung in the air when the sharp scrape of wood against marble cut through the tension. At the back of the room, Ethan's grandfather had risen from his chair. His steps were slow but unshaken, the quiet authority of his presence carrying more weight than all the shouting combined. Guests turned their heads, whispers dissolving as he moved forward, his hand slipping into the pocket of his suit. When he reached the front, he stopped, his gaze sweeping across the chaos, Emily crumbling in her gown, Ethan pale and trembling, Daniel staring at the floor, and the mother rigid with rage. Then, with a voice that was both calm and commanding, he spoke. No one here seems willing to seek the truth, but I have sought it, and I found it. From his pocket, he produced a small black USB drive. It seemed almost fragile in his weathered fingers, but the weight it carried was undeniable. The guests leaned closer, their breaths caught in their throats as he handed it to the technician by the projector. The screen at the end of the hall flickered. At first, only static, then an image sharpened. The footage was unmistakable, grainy but clear enough. Daniel, dressed in the very suit he now wore, stepping into a hotel corridor. A woman, her hair falling over her shoulders, met him at the door. There was no mistaking what followed. The embrace was tender, then intimate. Lips pressed around, jaws together with the hunger of a secret too long hidden. Gasps spread like fire across the hall. Emily staggered back as if struck, her bouquet falling from her grasp, petals scattering across the floor. Her face, drained of all color, reflected a heartbreak far deeper than anger could reach. "Turn it off!" Daniel barked suddenly, his voice breaking for the first time. He lunged toward the projector, but his attempt came too late. The room had already seen what could never be unseen. His image with another woman had been cast larger than life for all to witness. The silence that followed was colder than stone. Then, slowly, Ethan's mother turned her gaze toward Daniel. Where earlier there had been fire directed at her son, now there was disgust aimed at the groom she had welcomed. "Get out," she spat, her voice trembling with fury and humiliation. "Get out of here before I forget this is my daughter's day." Daniel froze, his mouth opening as though to explain, but no words came. He looked at Emily, whose tears streamed silently as she turned away, unable to bear his eyes. The strength left his shoulders, and he lowered his head. Without another word, he walked toward the door, the whispers following him like a tide of judgment. The wedding once adorned with roses, laughter, and light collapsed in that moment. No music returned, no joy revived. Only the wreckage of promises lay scattered across the floor. Through it all, Ethan stood motionless. The burn of earlier accusations had not faded, but the truth now stood plain for everyone to see. He was not the traitor. He was not the destroyer of his sister's day. Yet vindication did not bring relief. Instead, it felt hollow, because the damage had already been done. His name had already been dragged through the dirt. His sister's trust had already been shattered, and no proof, however undeniable, could erase the wound of being doubted by those who mattered most. What lingered in that silence was not only betrayal, but a reminder of how fragile trust is when fear and pride are allowed to speak louder than loyalty. The truth had been revealed, but truth never arrives without consequence. In the wreckage of that hall, Ethan realized that truth is never just about exposure. It is about the courage to see what stands in front of us, even when it hurts, even when it tears apart the illusions we cling to. To choose truth is to accept pain, but it is also the only path that prevents pain from becoming permanent. As the hall emptied, the remnants of the broken wedding lingered in the scattered petals, overturned chairs, and the hollow silence left behind. Ethan stood at the edge of it all, unsure whether to feel relief that his innocence had been proven, or despair that the proof had cost his sister her future. His grandfather, however, had not yet finished. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pressed a sealed envelope into Ethan's hand. "I received this early this morning," the old man said, his voice low but firm. "It belongs to you now." Ethan hesitated, fingers trembling as he slid the paper out. Inside were photographs not of Daniel, not of Emily, but of someone in shadow placing a USB drive at his grandfather's doorstep. The figure was unmistakable even from behind, the stance familiar in a way that pierced him deeper than the accusations ever had. His mother. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He turned toward her, holding the envelope as though it were a weapon he had never wished to wield. "It was you." His voice cracked, not with accusation, but with the raw wound of betrayal. She did not flinch. Her eyes, cold and sharp, met his without an ounce of shame. "Yes," she said simply, her tone laced with a kind of pride that twisted into cruelty. "I left it there, and I let them all believe it was you." Ethan staggered back, the words heavier than the slap that had opened the day. "You let Emily think I destroyed her wedding. You let everyone look at me with hatred. Why, her reply was ice wrapped in iron. Because she would never have believed the truth if it came kindly. If she thought you were guilty, she would cling harder to Daniel just to spite you. She needed to see him for what he really was. And now she has. He shook his head, his voice trembling. You didn't just expose him. You sacrificed me. You used me as the villain because I was easy to throw away. A shadow of something flickered across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Her words were merciless. Do not pretend to be surprised. You've always been the stain on this family. A son who flaunts his difference, who brings shame wherever he stands. Your sister's love, her happiness, that was worth more than the dignity of a boy who chose that path. Ethan's heart thudded, his body trembling with the weight of her rejection laid bare in front of him. He had known she never accepted him, but hearing her say it, that his worth was less than nothing, was a wound that would never close. His grandfather stepped closer, his voice sharp as a blade. Enough. But the damage had already been carved into the silence. Ethan lowered the envelope, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. At that moment, he understood something painful but undeniable. Family could be the sharpest weapon when love was twisted by prejudice. To his mother, his identity was not simply something she disagreed with. It was the excuse she clung to whenever she needed someone to bear the blame. The lesson burned itself into him. When people decide another's worth based on who they are, rather than what they do, cruelty becomes easy. But truth does not justify cruelty, and love cannot grow from sacrifice built on injustice. Ethan learned that day that being made the scapegoat did not make him weak. It revealed the weakness in those who would rather break their own blood than face the truth with honesty. When Emily returned to the room, her veil removed and her makeup stained with tears, the heaviness of her steps told Ethan she had seen the envelope too. She carried it in her trembling hands, the photograph spilling slightly from the edges. Her eyes red, swollen, yet burning with fury, searched for their mother. "You let this happen," she whispered, her voice breaking before it rose to a cry that filled the hall. "You let my brother be hated, spat on, and accused of betrayal, all so you could force me to open my eyes." Her mother's chin lifted, her expression cold as marble. "It was necessary. You were blind to Daniel's lies. And if sacrificing him," her gaze cut toward Ethan like a blade, "meant saving you, then so be it." Emily's breath trembled as she clutched the photos tighter. Her voice cracked, but her words carried the strength of truth. "No, love isn't sacrificed like this. Love is not deciding one child's happiness is worth more than the other's dignity. He's my brother. He's my family. And I will not let you destroy him just because you cannot accept who he is." The guests, still gathered in broken clusters, fell silent again. A ripple of recognition swept through them as they heard the bride defend the brother who had been shamed. Then, as if sparked by her courage, hands began to clap. The sound was hesitant at first, but it grew an echo of support, a rhythm of defiance against the cruelty that had unfolded. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt the weight of a crowd not as judgment, but as affirmation. His father, who had remained silent all day, finally moved. He stepped forward, placing his hand on Ethan's shoulder, and said nothing. But silence, when given with love, can be stronger than words. He turned then, guiding Ethan and Emily toward the doors, leaving behind the woman who had chosen control over compassion. Their mother stood alone among roses crushed into the carpet, her authority shattered by the truth she thought she controlled. Days turned into weeks. The scandal of the broken wedding faded from whispers into silence. But Daniel's absence spoke louder than any rumor. Then, one evening, Ethan's phone buzzed with an unknown number. A message appeared. Daniel. He wanted to meet, to explain, to find a way back. Ethan looked at the words for a long while before pressing delete. There was no hesitation, no regret. He needed no reconciliation with a man who had betrayed his sister and abandoned him in silence. What he had now was far more precious. For the first time, his father looked at him without shame. For the first time, Emily chose to defend him before defending appearances. The family he had always longed for was not perfect, but it was real. Built not on fear, but on the choice to stand with love instead of prejudice. Ethan realized that the deepest liberation does not come from being proven right. It comes from being seen for who you truly are and being loved anyway. And sometimes what is lost a groom, a ceremony, a mother's approval becomes the space where something stronger can grow. Love is not about control. Love is standing with someone even when it costs you something, even when the world is watching, even when the truth hurts. That day, in the ruins of white roses and shattered vows, Ethan finally found the kind of love that matters, not the love of perfection, but the love that chooses him as he is. So tell me, if you had been sitting in that hall, would you have clapped for Ethan when Emily defended him, or would you have stayed silent? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to follow Heart Stories for more powerful tales where truth, love, and courage always find a way to shine.